Going.
What's up, man? How you doing?
I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm good, man. That's a sexy wall of books you got behind you there.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. One of these days I'll get to them all.
Yeah, that's right. That's the mantra. I'm in the same boat. I've kind of graduated to audiobooks in my older age. It seems like I could traverse and I kind of take it in a little
Yeah.
better. So one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I was on Kindle for a long time and I went back to physical books. So,
Yeah. They need to come up with a way at night while we're sleeping and we're just using up all those hours to somehow infiltrate our brains with books. Maybe just for 1 hour or so.
yeah,
That'd be
absolutely.
nice. So where are you
Yeah.
located?
I'm in North Texas. I'm about an hour out of Dallas.
Okay, right on. Well, you guys have been having some excitement. The football team's doing good. You guys won a world championship.
Yeah, it's been an eventful year in sports. I grew up in Oklahoma, so yeah, I'm a big Dallas fan.
Okay, cool, man. Very cool. Well, I'm in Kansas City, so we've had a little taste of that champagne, so to speak. So it's been good.
Yeah, yeah. I will always remember the game between Oklahoma and Texas Tech where Mahomes and Baker Mayfield put up, 70 points apiece.
Oh, see, I that was before my time. I mean, I remember there was a film about Brett Veach trying to vet and get Mahomes, but the college years were something that I wasn't hip
Yeah.
to. But yeah, man, that's cool. I'll have to go look at the highlights of that. That sounds pretty intriguing.
It's a crazy game. It's a crazy
Yeah,
game.
yeah, that's cool. Well, hey, man, it's great to meet you, and I want to begin our conversation with surviving a pandemic. How did you do the last 3.5 years, and how did it change you?
The pandemic was tough. I think when it first started, my wife and I we were both had been overseas together, and so we were both kind of homebodies. We were still kind of healing from our traumas and stuff back then. So the pandemic for us was hard in some ways, but in other ways we were used to staying home, so it was probably easier than most. I think I did feel that collective grief though that everybody kind of had from staying home, and I mean, people handle it differently, and then there's all kinds of other stuff that was going on that's really bad. But it was tough, I think, from a collective standpoint. But I will say that it kind of led me into a period where I think I was able to heal more from my traumas and my past, and really kind of move forward with my life a little bit.
So let's get to the root of what you do for a living. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of third grade students. It's career day. And one of the kids says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer them?
I'd say I help people. I help people know that they're whole and they're loved by themselves, and that this world is a good place full of joy and life.
We need that. We need so much more of that. It's interesting. Every time I talk to, therapists or people that are coaching to help people, they always talk about the number one obstacle is that we're always so hard on ourselves.
Yeah, I think that we have this like idea of, oh, I've got to be perfect and I'm chasing perfection, and also that I think we have this idea that we've got to do all these things that we're told we have to do
Yeah.
by our tribes, by our teachers, our parents, our community. And I think that we got to step back and think, well, what do I want to do? What am I supposed to do? What am I meant to do?
Yeah. So let's get to before we leave third grade. Tell me, what did you want to be when you were in the third grade? What was your dream to grow up and become?
Yeah, I was always fascinated by the military and like intelligence. I didn't want to be James Bond necessarily, but I thought he was pretty cool. So intelligence, that kind of thing, always interested me, even when I was a kid.
So let's go back to where you were born and raised. You mentioned Oklahoma. Talk to me a little bit about how these seeds got into you to become a spiritual guide, to want to help people. How did all this evolve into who you are today?
I wasn't ever on an overtly spiritual path. I was raised Southern Baptist, but by a liberal family, which was kind of a weird combination. And when I went to the military, I definitely wasn't on a spiritual path. I kind of had this whole other mindset, and I was kind of a young ideological kid, I guess. And for me, having been overseas 12 out of 15 years, the first 15 years of my adult life in the desert, I think that when I came home, I wasn't on a spiritual path. I did have a VA therapist that taught me Eastern medicine and Eastern faith, which was kind of an odd pairing. So I think that did have an effect on me, but I wasn't able to really wrap my head around it till about 7 years later.
So we all have these moments where we're like, all right, there's a God. All right. There's definitely a spiritual force that exists in this
Right.
reality. What was the moment for you? The first moment where you thought, okay, this is real. This makes sense.
Yeah. I was laying in bed a couple years ago, about a little over 2 years now. My wife was asleep, and I just had this moment of clarity or understanding. Some call it an awakening or whatever. And it just, the world made sense. I felt this oneness and this wholeness with the whole universe and with other people and then nature and everything. And I kind of understood what my higher purpose was, which is to help people help themselves and find that wholeness inside. And it was a very warm thing. It was a very powerful thing, kind of almost ineffable.
So that's ultimately at the end of the day, one of your driving forces is to ensure people find that moment, find that place within them to feel that clarity.
100%. I think that, spirituality means totally different things to different people, and we all have this unique path. It's going to look different for you or for anybody else, and that's okay. Maybe we can have a conversation, share our journeys, ask good questions, seek good answers, change answers, change what the target is. And I think the why matters, and having that conversation matters. Yeah, but I think that we can all find it.
So you have had an interesting melding. I mean, coming up in the Midwest, it was always kind of the backbone has been Christianity. But I remember one of the first times I really delved in my 20s into Eastern theology. I went to California and there was a book of Buddha in one of the bedside stands. And I remember reading it. There was a level that just stripped everything away. There was this acknowledgement of principles and virtues that I wasn't hip to in my life at all. And then all of a sudden, it's like there's this simplicity of this being that's watching a leaf fall into a river and just being cognizant of all of these things around. And I think, do you ever feel like you have this melding and melting pot of different Eastern and Western that make you feel spirituality in a very specific way?
Yeah, that's probably me to a T. I think that once I had my moment, I wasn't on a spiritual path, so I had to go figure out, how do I talk to people about this? How do I have a conversation, and how do I strengthen the walls of my beliefs, or the pillars of my beliefs, I guess. And yeah, I read stuff. I'll read a book on Buddhism and switch to Hinduism, and I'll read an Abrahamic faith based book, and then philosophy, and I'll just rotate through self-help as well, modern self-help. And I think that from what I've seen, they're all saying very similar things, uh even going back, 5,000 years, 2,000 years, whatever it is. And I think that we're all in a very similar place. I think the Judeo-Christian upbringing that you discussed, kind of in the Midwest and across America, I think that we don't learn philosophy, we don't learn Eastern faith, we don't learn all this rich human thought from around the world that is so valid, and is really only, to me, enriching the idea of what Christians have taught. And I think if you look at the Christian mystics, that were quieted by the Catholic Church and by even the Protestant Church over the centuries, you can see that there were many Christians that felt very similar ways to the Buddha or Laozi, or a lot of the ancient philosophers.
So, if you could go back in time and witness anything in history that was theologically based that happened on this planet, what would you love to have run into and seen with your own eyes?
That's a great question. Wow, there's so many options.
Yes. We could
I
you could string it together like a constellation.
yeah, I would have to say there's a lot of answers that pop in my head, but I'm gonna have to say I would go back to the origins of where they were writing down and recording, even via oral tradition, the Vedic traditions of the Indus Valley and the Indian subcontinent with Hinduism, the
Yeah.
origins of Hindu. That's where I would go. Like
Yeah.
where the Bhagavad Gita was written, the Mahabharata, and all the Vedas, and learn that, because I'm extremely fascinated by Hinduism.
So who's been a hero for you historically throughout your life that's inspired you to become who you are?
I was raised in the 80s and the 90s, and this is an easy one for me. It was Michael Jordan for me.
Yeah.
Uh, what I loved about him is I never felt like he was the most talented player on the court. I believe that he had all this raw talent, obviously, but I think that he worked harder, and I think that, um, and I love that. I mean, yeah, he was into endorsements and commercials, but it was I've missed this many shots, and I've taken the game winning shot and missed, and all this stuff, but I keep going. And uh there was I appreciate I think that I appreciate zealots sometimes, and the fact that they're like singularly committed to something,
Yeah.
and they put their whole being into it. I think that they're living their dharma, they're living their higher purpose. So I would say Michael Jordan.
You know, the thing that's there's so many things that are fascinating about him because I'm 51. I grew up in that area. I watched it and just we were just amazed by it. Like being in Kansas City and watching Bo Jackson was a spectacle that was
Yeah.
like you will never see that again. It was crazy. But the thing about Jordan was is that he literally made the White Sox and they made it clear they are not giving him this position because they need to sell tickets. It's based on merit and he made it and then the Bulls called him back and he still won 2 or 3 more championships, you know?
Yeah, and
So
yeah.
he
Yeah,
just so
and hitting a baseball is so hard, right? Like it's the hardest thing
right.
in the world to do, right? So
I mean, mentally to take yourself from one sport to the other. I mean, the
yeah.
fact that you're already a professional athlete and then you have to go into another realm of that. Like that's why Deion Sanders and Bo Jackson and all those guys were such spectacles because it is hard to just be in one sport. But I think that's the thing. You know, Michael Jordan, have you seen The Last Dance? Have you watched that?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh, dude, I mean, just even when he was betting with that guy that was down in the locker rooms that worked at the Delta Center, it's like he
Yeah.
just wouldn't stop. That was like that was the sword by which he lived and died from, you know? It
Yeah.
was the gambling problem and all of that, but it was still a part of the aura and the don't stop and be the best at what you do.
Yeah, and I love that. I love that you even the gambling thing. I think one thing we have to realize with our people that we revere is they're still human, right?
Yeah.
They're still just human beings, walking their own path, and I really appreciate that about whether it's Michael Jordan and heroes, or whether it's religious figures or philosophical or spiritual figures. They're just people.
Yeah. So, if you could meet one person alive on the planet, you may have already answered this, and spend some time with them, who would it be?
Wow, one person alive on the planet.
Yeah.
Um, I'm gonna go and say probably I'm gonna say Tony Robbins actually.
Yeah. You know,
Yeah.
that's another guy that's fascinating me growing up in the 80s. We saw all the infomercials, you know, and it was kind of like the big pastor. You just
Yeah.
thought that something was going to downfall, something was going to go away. But Tony's always stayed relevant. In fact, he's even become more ingrained in our mass culture with just he's in movies, people reference him all the time. Like there is something amazing about whether you're into the motivational speaking realm or books or whatever, you have to look at Tony Robbins of all of them and say, dude, that guy, he's spot on. I mean, he is relevant and he's stayed where he's always been.
My mother-in-law took a workshop with him back in the 80s. And back then she was a Pennsylvania teacher making less than $40,000 a year. And he had them all write their goals down. Her goal was for her to make 40,000 a year, which was unheard of at the time. And she ended up going back and collectively bargaining with the rest of the teachers, and she got everyone paid $40,000.
Wow.
So that's just one example of, I mean, like back in the day, it actually worked,
Yeah.
and I think that's one reason he became so popular is like, and I've read his books, and I see a lot of like Eastern faith philosophies, and ideas come through, and because he kind of helped invent the self-help genre, right?
He
So
did. Yeah. He's
yeah.
definitely the godfather and father of it for sure. Yeah. So what is it for you? Speaking of someone like Tony Robbins and being motivated, what is it for you every day that gets you out of bed, that motivates you to help others and to provide that clarity and that help for people?
I think that part of it is I want to give back to the world. When I was overseas in the desert for 12 years, I saw a lot of darkness. I was part of a lot of darkness. Um, so I want to give back to the world. I want to give light back to the world. Um, and I think that's it, is just get up and make the world a better place. I think starting by making myself better and loving myself, because that's the best thing we can do to make the world a better place.
So let's say you have a dream tonight. You run into the senior and high school version of you, and you could give that young version of you a piece of advice based on the wisdom that you've gained in your life up to this point. What advice would you dispense on that younger version of you?
I think I would say just go live your life. Live your life how you want to live it. Love yourself, and and don't worry about anybody else. Just be yourself.
So speaking of someone like Tony Robbins, there's all these quotes and advice they give. But what's been the best advice you've ever gotten in your life?
I think that it's to be kind. I think that even before I had my spiritual kind of awakening or whatever, I had like this mini event in my freshman year of high school where I just realized kindness was a guiding, value for me and guidepost, and that it made things so much easier in life. So I think be kind is the answer.
You know, after I had my son, this is probably 2005, I started a job as an IT technician in a school district. And I remember my boss at the time was one of my favorite people of all time. He always used to tell me you attract more bees with honey. He used to always say that. And I even tell my son that now. My son's gonna be 19. He's on the spectrum. And I mentioned that to him, and he the other day said, can you write that quote down about bees and honey? And it's like, that's cool. So it's those little things that people can put in your head because it's true. It really does. I think, especially the older you get, I think you realize when you're on the other side and you realize that your time's running out, there's things that you want to do and get done, and being nice to each other just makes sense. It's a relatively easy thing to do.
It costs nothing, right?
Yeah. It's one of the few things that's free in this inflated world of ours.
That's right. That's right.
So, so what are you the proudest of everything you've accomplished and overcome and become and been to? What is it that you're the proudest of?
Yeah, you ask really good questions that are really hard questions.
Yes, thank you.
Uh, I my wife and I've been married for 20 years. Um, and I think it's that we're together. We've been together. We've worked together. She was with me all those years in combat zones. And when we were in Afghanistan, uh, we helped create a unit from the ground up, from like broken parts and on the cheap, as far as the military industrial complex goes. And it became this really elite unit that was kind of like a panda bear. Everybody who came to Kandahar wanted to see it and talk about it. And uh, there's a lot of darkness that was in my time over there, but for those 6.5 years in Kandahar, Afghanistan, we built something that was pretty amazing, pretty special. And I'm on a spiritual path now. I'm living a much different life, but that might be the best thing I ever did.
I was reading I'm listening to a book and they're recounting 9/11, and it's been so long ago. And I remember I was in the back of a water taxi in Venice, Italy when it happened. When I traveled, I would kind of cut myself off and I was backpacking. When I what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think about that day? Because you were the ones that had to go over and you were the ones that were defending the fact that we were attacked on our soil. But what's the first thing after all of these years that comes to mind when you think about that?
I'm going to give a little bit of a different answer to that. I was in the military. I was in a real world unit that did counterterrorism. Actually, the day it happened, I was actually on shift. I was night shift. I was working that morning, and uh, my thought was that my world would never be the same. And I had this realization that the whole world was going to change, and I also knew in an instant, and it was a somber thing that, oh my God, I'm never going to want for anything else in the world. I will always have a job. I will always, and it was kind of an awful realization. Um, but I realized that the world was going to change, and I realized that I would always have something that I would be able to do, if that makes sense. It's kind of a weird thought, but
Well, it's fascinating. And that reason why I asked that is because you were on the ground. You were doing things that a lot of people didn't realize. And I think as time moves on, we all forget. It's like with the pandemic. You know, there's this anticipation that everybody had once people could go out and start doing things again, but that wears away. And being really intertwined in that, because I remember 9/11 affected me in a pretty profound
Mhm.
way. I mean, I had to fight to come back to America. My flight didn't exist from Paris to Kansas City. I ended up going to London and kind of got here, but I watched it from September 4th when I flew out to when I landed in St. Louis. The flags that were up, and the security, that was the moment that I can say in our lifetime, even before all of this lunacy of COVID happened, that's when everything really changed in my lifetime.
Yeah, I talked to my dad later that day, and he was a truck driver at the time, and even trucks weren't moving. He was at a truck stop, and trucks weren't moving on the interstate. And he told me he said, I think this is going to have a bigger impact in our country than Vietnam, which blew me away because I was raised in the 80s, right? Like where Vietnam was this fresh kind of scar that America had. And I was fascinated by Vietnam. And to think that 9/11 would have more of an impact than Vietnam, my dad telling me that as well kind of also blew me away a little bit. And he was right.
Yeah, my dad was in the military. That's why I'm in Kansas City. He was born in Brooklyn, raised in Long Island, and moved here and got in the military. And I remember a lot of echoes of what he was telling me on the phone at the time, which you didn't have cell phones. I didn't have one then. I had the calling card and all of that. And I remember at one point I finally made it to London and I saw all the memorials, and the English were so welcoming. And I remember he just kept saying, keep that passport in your front pocket. It's gold. Just watch yourself. And it felt like I was in some weird, Hemingway Farewell to Arms novel. Like everywhere I went, I felt like there was just this production around me. It just was very surreal, you know.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, it was a strange time. So at the end of the day, this is the last of the hard questions. This is the therapy question. Everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, colleagues, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I think that I'm this imperfect thing that's still learning. So I'm a spiritual seeker, and I'm on a journey, and that journey's never going to end. And so that's who I am.
The one thing too that I always like to ask is, as we've come out of this pandemic and things are opening up and a lot of things are happening, do you feel as though we're in the midst of a spiritual awakening or approaching one? Where do you see that?
I have great faith and hope in humanity and humankind, and I believe that we all have the ability to raise the consciousness of the world around us and the collective consciousness of the world. So I believe that in the age of information where we all have access to all this information and we have access to each other, to one another, I think that, yeah, we can definitely make this world a better place. I don't think that we're doomed. I think that there's a lot of stuff going on. I think there's a lot of imperfections. There's a lot of darkness out there, but there's so much light. So I think we're going to be okay.
Well said. And I think at the end of the day, I feel the same way. I see that glass half full. I think collectively, the collective mass of humans that need to make a decision will make the right one.
Yeah, I think most people are good people. I
Yeah.
believe that.
At their core, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. So if anyone wants to hire you, learn more about you, reach out to you, your entire world, where do they go?
Yeah, our main page is kishar.org, KISHAR.org, and that's got everything that we're about. It's got links to our socials and our YouTube channel, which is free and open to the public. And uh, come and check us out. We have a spiritual community where people can unite with each other, and we do individual one-on-one spiritual guidance and coaching, and it's all nonprofit and stuff goes back to help people. So.
Excellent, John. This has been wonderful. You're a wonderful, needed spoke of light in this world that we have. So thank you for your story. Thank you for your time, and best of luck with everything.
Thank you so much, Joe. You have a great show, and I love your format, and you're an excellent host.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Send my best to Dallas.
I will, absolutely.